They shaved a woman's head for fun. Right there in the dusty street, under the noon sun, the crowd laughed, drunk on cruelty, while the church bell tolled in the distance. She trembled, humiliated, shorn, alone. Then the laughter stopped. Heavy boots echoed down the boardwalk. Every man turned. Through the saloon doors stepped her husband, the one they called the Amish Reaper. Silent, broad-shouldered, eyes cold as iron. No one moved. Not a soul dared breathe as he wrapped his coat around her shoulders and whispered, "No one touches what God has redeemed." But this isn't just a story of fear. It's a story of faith, justice, and the power of love stronger than shame. Because the same men who mocked her are coming again, and this time they want everything she has left. What happens when mercy stands face to face with vengeance? When a man feared for his wrath chooses forgiveness instead? Will it save them both, or cost them everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The noonday sun burned over Calico Bend, turning the main street to dust and glare. The air smelled of whiskey, sweat, and coal smoke drifting from the smithy. Flies hummed over the horse trough. A church bell rang faintly from the far edge of town, slow and hollow, as if it knew something shameful was about to happen. Amanda Weaver stood in the street with her bonnet half torn from her head. The wind lifted strands of her auburn hair, shining bright against the dirt on her face. A ring of miners had gathered around her, their laughter sharp and ugly. One man, his face red and eyes mean, tugged the ribbon from her bonnet and waved it like a trophy. "Let's see that proud scalp," he sneered. "You think you're better'n us, hiding under that bonnet? Heard you was married to that ghost of a man. What's he call hisself? The Amish Reaper?" Amanda said nothing. Her heart thudded in her chest. She had come to town only for lamp oil and flour, but word traveled faster than wind in Calico Bend. The gossip about her husband had spread. How he'd left the railroad after exposing bribery. How some said he'd killed men and walked away without blinking. Folks feared him, and they hated what they feared. A different miner stepped forward, carrying a pair of shears used for sheep. "Let's shear her clean," he laughed. "See if her reaper still wants her then?" Amanda gasped and backed up, but rough hands caught her shoulders. Her voice broke as she cried, "Please don't! In God's name, don't!" The men only laughed louder. A crowd gathered, the barber, the deputy, even women from the general store. None stepped in. The barber muttered something about teaching her a lesson. Someone threw her bonnet into the mud. Then the shears rasped close to her ear. With one cruel snip, a lock of hair fell across her shoulder. Another snip followed, and another. The cold air hit her scalp as the red strands drifted down like feathers. Tears blurred her eyes, but she refused to scream. The crowd's laughter echoed down the street like crows on a carcass. The deputy's boot scuffed the dirt as if he might step forward. Then he turned away. When it was done, her hair hung uneven and ragged. The men stepped back, grinning. "There," one said. "That's what pride looks like cut down to size." Amanda sank to her knees, hands trembling against the dirt. Her heart felt hollow. The sound of her own breathing filled her ears, until she heard something else. Boots. Heavy, deliberate boots. The laughter faltered. Someone whispered, "He's here." From the end of the boardwalk came a tall man dressed in black homespun. His beard was trimmed close, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat. His stride was slow, steady, the kind that didn't need haste. Each step carried the weight of a storm held back. The barber stepped aside. The man in black didn't look at him. His eyes, gray as gunmetal, rested only on the woman kneeling in the dirt. Amanda blinked up through her tears. Her voice cracked. "Ephraim?" The man, her husband, didn't answer right away. He reached down, lifted his coat from his shoulders, and draped it over her back. The smell of pine and horses filled her nose, and she began to shake harder. Ephraim turned to the men. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the street like a blade. "Which one of you did this?" No one spoke. The deputy shifted uneasily. The drunk with the shears dropped them, the sound sharp in the dust. Ephraim bent down and picked up the shears. He turned them over in his hands. "Ain't much fit for sheep," he said softly, "and a poor tool for men, too." He tossed them into the horse trough. He looked back at Amanda, then straightened to his full height. "You all listen," he said, still calm. "No one touches what God has redeemed." The words rolled through the air and settled heavy. One by one, the men lowered their eyes. Someone spat and muttered an excuse about just a jest. Ephraim said nothing more. He helped Amanda to her feet, his hand steady under her elbow. They walked through the parting crowd. No one dared stop them. Dust rose behind their boots, curling in the sunlight like smoke. At the edge of town, Ephraim lifted Amanda into his wagon. The horse snorted and pawed the ground. He climbed onto the bench beside her and took the reins. They rode in silence. The town shrank behind them, its church steeple, its saloon, its shame. Amanda held the coat tight around her shoulders. She could still feel the weight of eyes on her back. Her scalp stung from every breeze. Ephraim finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come alone." "I didn't think they'd—" Her throat closed. "I only needed flour." His jaw tightened. "Evil don't need reason." She turned toward him. "You came back. I heard talk in Pueblo. Rode hard." He flicked the reins. "Couldn't let 'em shame you and call it justice." They passed scrub trees and dry gullies. The sun began to lower, bleeding gold through the clouds. Ephraim's hands stayed steady on the reins. Amanda studied his face. Older now, the lines deeper around his eyes. He looked harder, yet quieter somehow. "I thought you hated me," she whispered. Ephraim's gaze stayed forward. "I hated what I'd become." They reached the old bridge by twilight. The wagon wheels creaked over worn planks. Beyond lay their homestead, a small rise above the Arkansas River, the cabin half hidden by cottonwoods. Smoke still curled from its stone chimney, though no one had tended it for a year. As they rolled to a stop, crickets chirped. Amanda climbed down, still clutching the coat. Ephraim unhitched the horse and led it to the corral. She stood uncertainly by the cabin door. The wood looked older than she remembered, gray and split by weather. Ephraim struck a match and lit the lantern inside. The glow reached across the small room. Wood walls, a worn table, a single bed, and the old Bible on the shelf. Dust danced in the light. "Sit," he said gently. Amanda obeyed. Her eyes followed him as he poured water from a pitcher, wet a cloth, and handed it to her. She pressed it to her raw scalp and winced. "You're safe now," he said. She swallowed hard. "Why would you care, after the way I left?" He paused, then spoke low. "Because I made vows. Vows don't vanish just because a heart gets hurt." Amanda looked down, tears falling silently. "I was a fool." Ephraim crouched beside her. "So was I. Thought anger could make me righteous. Turns out it only made me empty." Outside, a coyote yipped. The river murmured below the bluff. After a long silence, he said, "I'll fetch flour from Jonah tomorrow. You rest." She nodded faintly. Her voice barely rose above the crackle of the fire. "Will you stay?" Ephraim gave a small, tired smile. "I never left in spirit." He took an extra blanket from the trunk and spread it over her shoulders. Then he moved to the window and looked out toward the dark horizon. In the distance, lightning flickered over the plains. He knew the storm wasn't over. Not with the railroad men circling like wolves, nor the bitterness of the town. But tonight, one small thing was set right. He turned back toward her. Amanda sat by the lantern, hands folded, her cropped hair catching the light like a halo of flame. Ephraim's chest ached, not with anger this time, but with something close to peace. "Sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we start again?" Amanda nodded. She leaned her head against the chair and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind sighed through the cottonwoods. The house, once empty, now carried the fragile breath of two people who had found their way home through pain and mercy. And for the first time in a long while, Ephraim whispered a prayer, not for justice, but for grace. Dawn broke over the river valley, soft and cold. Mist hung low between the cottonwoods, and the cabin walls glowed faintly in the first light. Inside, Amanda woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Her scalp still ached, tender beneath the bandana she'd tied over it. She listened to the sounds: boots on the porch, the thump of kindling, the scrape of metal against wood. The simple rhythm of work. Ephraim was outside splitting firewood. His movements were slow and deliberate, each swing measured, each piece stacked neatly. Amanda stood in the doorway and watched him. She remembered that same strength when they first married. The quiet way he carried himself, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. He turned, seeing her there, and gave a small nod. "Mornin'." She hesitated. "Mornin'." The silence between them was strange, not sharp like before, just hollow, waiting to be filled. She looked down at the dusty ground. "You still drink your coffee black?" He smiled faintly. "Ain't changed that much?" She poured 2 tin cups from the pot on the stove. He came in, ducking under the doorframe. The warmth from his body filled the small cabin, the smell of pine and sweat lingering around him. He set the axe aside and sat across from her at the table. Neither spoke for a while. The clock ticked slow. Amanda sipped her coffee, then said softly, "I reckon I owe you thanks." Ephraim looked up. "For what?" "For coming back for me." He set the cup down. "Couldn't let that stand. Folks forget what mercy is when there ain't someone to remind them." She swallowed hard, remembering the laughter, the feel of the shears against her scalp. "You didn't have to step in." "Yes, I did." His voice was steady. "You're my wife, Amanda, still." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you were done with me after I left." He leaned back, the chair creaking. "Thought I was done with anger more'n anything else. Took me a year to learn the Lord don't speak through rage. He speaks quiet. Like this morning." The sun broke through the window, turning the dust in the air to gold. Amanda managed a weak smile. "I'd near forgot what peace feels like." "Peace don't mean the fight's over," Ephraim said. "It means we're learning how to stand in it without losing our soul." She looked at his shaven head, startled. "You did that for me?" He shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Figured we'd start even." Amanda's breath caught. "You always were a stubborn man." He smiled, just barely. "Takes one to marry one." They ate breakfast in silence. Cornbread from the night before, a few strips of dried venison. When they finished, Ephraim rose and began checking the rifle by the door. "Gonna ride into town for supplies. You need anything?" She shook her head. "Just be careful." He hesitated at the door. "I ain't looking for trouble." "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes it comes looking for you." He gave a single nod and left. The day passed quiet. Amanda cleaned the cabin, swept the hearth, and mended a torn curtain. She found the old Bible still on the shelf, a sprig of lavender pressed between its pages. She ran her fingers over the verse he'd underlined years ago. "The Lord is my refuge and my fortress. In him will I trust." By afternoon, clouds gathered. She went out to feed the chickens and saw a hawk circling high above the valley. It made her uneasy. When the sound of hooves came on the trail at dusk, she hurried to the gate. Ephraim rode up, his face grave. A folded paper was tucked into his vest pocket. "What is it?" she asked. He swung down from the saddle, handed her the letter, and walked past her into the cabin. She followed, unsealing the red wax with trembling fingers. The letter bore the crest of the Colorado Western Rail Company. Amanda read aloud, her voice thin. "By order of the board, all properties within 3 miles of Calico Bend are hereby claimed for right-of-way construction of the new spur line. Compensation will be determined upon surrender of deed." She looked up, stunned. "They're taking the land?" Ephraim's jaw worked. "They think they can." She set the letter down. This is your land. You paid for it fair." "Paid twice over," he said grimly. "Once in coin, once in conscience." Amanda frowned. "You mean the railroad men?" He nodded. "Same company. I worked for 'em once. Found out they was bribing town officials to seize ranch land. Wrote letters, told the papers. They called me a traitor. Been watching me ever since." Amanda's stomach turned cold. "That's why you left the line." "That's why they're back." He met her eyes. "They ain't just after dirt. They're after quiet. They want no man or woman speaking truth 'gainst 'em." A rumble of thunder rolled over the hills. "What'll we do?" she asked. Ephraim looked at the window, the stormlight flickering across his face. "We'll stand, but not with guns." "You mean you won't fight them?" He shook his head. "Already done enough fighting. The Lord'll show a better way." Amanda felt a flicker of fear. "They don't fear the Lord, Ephraim. They only fear men like you." He gave her a tired smile. "Then maybe it's time they learned both can be the same thing." The rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy. He went to the door, watching the storm roll across the plain. "We'll talk to Jonah tomorrow. He knows the law better'n most. If the company's lying, he'll help prove it." Amanda nodded. Jonah always was loyal. "Man of his word," Ephraim said. "More than most white men I ever met." Lightning flared outside, and Amanda saw for the first time how worn her husband looked. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and the lines on his face seemed carved from stone. She wanted to reach out but couldn't find the courage. Instead, she said softly, "You should eat." He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the storm. "I will, after I pray." That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Amanda couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the men's laughter, the glint of the shears. But when she turned her head, she saw Ephraim sitting by the window, his Bible open, the lantern casting a soft glow around him. He whispered a prayer, low, steady, full of something that sounded like hope. And for the first time since her shame in the street, Amanda believed they might find a way forward. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth. Mist curled through the cottonwoods and drifted low over the river. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned to a soft bed of coals. Amanda stirred awake, wrapped in Ephraim's old quilt. The rain had washed the dust from the windows, and morning light shimmered pale and clean across the wooden floor. Ephraim was already outside. The rhythmic thunk of his axe striking wood echoed faintly through the air. Amanda lay still for a while, listening. That sound, steady, unhurried, had always comforted her, It meant life continuing, work being done, order returning. When she stepped outside, dew dampened her bare feet. Ephraim stood by the woodpile, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, arms shining with sweat though the air was cool. He didn't notice her at first. His eyes were fixed on his task, and each swing seemed to release a weight from his chest. "You're up early," she said softly. He set the axe down, straightened, and nodded toward the sunrise. "Couldn't sleep. Storm broke a few fence rails. Figured I'd get a start." Amanda folded her arms, glancing towards the pasture. "You always did think with your hands?" Ephraim smiled faintly. "Easier than thinking with my tongue." She almost laughed, but held it back. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was shy, like the space between two people learning to talk again after too many years apart. He pointed toward the small well near the corral. "Water's low. Might need to dig deeper soon." Amanda looked down at her bandana. "Seems everything here's gone shallow." He met her gaze, serious now. "Then we'll dig." Inside, she warmed biscuits and poured milk into tin cups. When he came in, she saw the wet dirt on his boots and the new crease at the corner of his eyes. He'd changed. Not harder, exactly, but more certain. She realized she trusted that certainty now more than she feared it. They ate quietly. Wind rattled the window pane. After a while, Ephraim rose, filled the basin with water, and carried it to the table. Without a word, he took a knife from his belt, opened it, and looked at her. "What are you doing?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Evening the score." He drew the blade across his scalp, careful and slow, cutting away the last of his short hair until both their heads were bare. When he finished, he rinsed the knife, folded it, and said, "World mocked you for what you couldn't stop. So now it mocks me, too." Amanda's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I did." He sat down again. "Now we're both starting over clean." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. "You always were a fool for fairness," he chuckled. "It's the only kind of fool God seems to favor." The morning passed in peace. Amanda swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and found small comfort in order. Ephraim patched the broken door hinge and reset the latch. Each movement was quiet, deliberate, respectful, like two people mending something sacred. By midday, the sun burned off the last of the fog. Amanda carried a basket to the river, knelt by the water, and washed the soiled bandana. The river shimmered silver and cold. She saw her reflection, bare head, strong eyes, and felt something shift inside her. Shame no longer ruled her. When she returned, Ephraim was sitting on the porch, sharpening a chisel. "How's the river?" he asked. "Still moving," she said, sitting beside him. He nodded. "So are we." They spent the afternoon in quiet labor, repairing the corral fence and trimming branches that hung low over the roof. When the sun began to set, Amanda fetched water from the well, while Ephraim stacked the last of the wood. As they sat down for supper, beans and bread, Amanda broke the silence. "I don't understand why you stayed out here all this time, after I left, I mean." Ephraim's eyes stayed on his bowl. "Didn't have anywhere else that felt honest." She studied him. "You could have gone back east." "East didn't want me, and I didn't want the noise." He looked up then, his gaze steady. "This land don't lie. You work it, it gives back what you sow. I needed that truth more than company." Amanda nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I reckon truth's better when shared." For a moment, warmth bloomed between them like sunlight through clouds. Then Amanda asked quietly, "You think we can start over?" "Truly?" Ephraim set down his spoon. "We already have. Ain't about forgetting. It's about building something new right on top of the old. Outside, a coyote called from across the hills. The sound carried through the still air, lonely but alive. Amanda smiled faintly. Guess that's what faith is, building on ruins. Ephraim nodded. That's what love is too. When they finished eating, Amanda washed the dishes while Ephraim added wood to the fire. He opened the window to let in the cool air and the sound of the river. As the night deepened, Amanda sat near the hearth, humming a hymn. Ephraim carved a small cross from a scrap of pine, shaping it carefully with his chisel. The scent of fresh-cut wood filled the room. After a while, Amanda spoke softly. You know they'll come for us again. The railroad men. I know. They won't forgive what you did. He nodded. Ain't asking for forgiveness from them. She hesitated. What about me? He looked up, eyes meeting hers. Already given. Amanda felt her chest ache, the way it did when tears came too fast to hold. You don't even know if I'm worth forgiving. Ephraim smiled gently. Ain't my place to decide what grace costs, just my place to live it. The fire popped, sparks drifting like tiny stars. Outside, the moon rose over the ridge. The cabin glowed softly in its light. Two silhouettes inside, side by side, quiet but unbroken. Before turning in, Ephraim paused by the window. Tomorrow, he said, I'll ride into town. Need to talk to Jonah before the company men get wind of that letter. Amanda's hands tightened on her apron. You think he'll help? I know he will. He turned back, his expression tender. Rest now. We'll need strength for what's coming. Amanda nodded. She watched him bank the fire and kneel beside the bed to pray, his voice low and steady. The words drifted through the room like a blessing, simple and sure. When he lay down, she whispered into the darkness, Thank you for coming for me. Ephraim's reply came soft but certain. Wasn't me, Amanda. The Lord sent me. The night settled around them, deep and still. The cabin, once empty, now breathed again, a house rebuilt by silence, forgiveness, and a promise yet to be tested. The morning after Ephraim's prayer broke clear and still. A thin frost coated the grass, glittering pale beneath the sunrise. The air smelled of wet pine and wood smoke. Amanda woke to the sound of boots on the porch and the clink of metal. Ephraim saddling the horse. He was packing light, jerky, a small hammer, a folded piece of cloth, and his Bible. Amanda stepped out onto the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her. You'll ride to Calico Bend? He nodded. Need to see Jonah. He'll know what the company's planning. Amanda looked towards the hills, where the road wound like a faded ribbon through the cottonwoods. It's a long ride for one man. Better one than two, he said gently. The town still remembers what they did to you. Her hands clenched in her shawl. Let them remember. Shame belongs to them, not me. Ephraim smiled faintly. You sound like a woman who's found her footing again. Maybe I have, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He mounted the horse and tipped his hat. Keep the fire going. I'll be back before sundown. Amanda watched until he vanished around the bend, dust rising behind him. Then she went inside, determined to make the home look lived in again. The cabin still bore the marks of neglect, the loose plank in the floor, the cracked glass in the window. But as she swept and scrubbed, warmth began to return. She baked cornbread, washed their old crockery, and hummed while she worked. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own home. By mid-morning, she carried laundry to the river and knelt among the reeds. The water ran cold and clear over her hands. She thought about Ephraim, how his eyes had changed, How peace seemed to live in him now where pride used to sit. She wondered if that peace could last once the railroad came again. When the wind shifted, she heard a distant whistle, the sound of an approaching train. She froze, staring toward the far horizon where a thin line of smoke trailed across the sky. The whistle wailed again, lonely and low, like a warning. Ephraim reached town before noon. The streets of Calico Bend looked cleaner than before, though the same rough faces lingered near the saloon. He dismounted, tied his horse at the hitching post, and walked toward the blacksmith's yard where Jonah Begay usually worked. Jonah looked up from shoeing a mule, sweat streaking his dark face. His long black hair was tied with a strip of leather. "Didn't think I'd see you this soon, brother," he said with a grin. Ephraim clasped his hand. "Wish it were for better reasons." Jonah's expression sobered. "Word's gone round. Railroad's claiming they bought half this valley." "They sent me a letter," Ephraim said. "Wants my land for their spur line." Jonah shook his head. "That's no surprise. They've been bribing the land clerk for months. The agent keeps new papers that don't match the old deeds." "You've seen it?" Jonah nodded. "Eliza and me heard talk from a clerk who felt guilty. Said the company's paying men to forge signatures of anyone they can't scare off." Ephraim's jaw tightened. "They'll come for mine next." "They will," Jonah agreed, hammering the last nail into the mule's shoe. "But you got proof of your deed still?" "In my chest at home, signed and sealed." "Then we'll need to show it to the judge before they move dirt." Jonah wiped his brow. "But that judge takes his orders from Crane, the railroad enforcer." Ephraim's face darkened. "Silas Crane. I remember him." Jonah gave a slow nod. "Then you know what we're up against." They walked together to the livery, talking low. Ephraim told him about the night in the town street, about Amanda's shaming and how he'd found her. Jonah's eyes burned with anger. "If I'd been there," Ephraim lifted a hand. "It's done. The Lord'll handle their reckoning." Jonah studied him a moment, then said, "You've changed." Ephraim gave a tired smile. "Had to. Anger near cost me everything." Jonah nodded. "Anger's a hard thing to bury on this land." They spoke a while longer, planning to meet again in 2 days to collect records and witnesses. Then Ephraim turned his horse homeward, hoping the light would hold. Amanda was kneading dough when she heard hooves on the trail. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. The sun had begun its slow drop toward the hills, and golden light spilled through the trees. Ephraim swung down from the saddle, his face set in quiet resolve. "What did Jonah say?" she asked. "More trouble than we thought," he said. He handed her a folded note. "He says Silas Crane's back in town. Works for the company now." Amanda froze. She remembered that name, one of the men who'd watched her humiliation and done nothing. "Then he'll come for us?" Ephraim nodded. "Soon as he knows we won't sell." She took a deep breath. "What do we do?" He untied a small parcel from his saddlebag. "We live honest, plant the wheat again, keep faith, and be ready." Amanda unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay a spool of thread, a small sack of flour, and a tiny carved wooden cross. "You bought this?" He nodded. "Thought the house could use something holy." She smiled faintly, though worry tugged at her. "You always bring back what we need, don't you?" Ephraim brushed dust from his coat. "I bring what I can. The rest's up to heaven." As the light faded, they stood on the porch, watching the sky burn orange and violet over the valley. The wheat field lay empty, waiting for seed. The river shimmered in the distance. Amanda leaned against the railing. "You think we can beat them, Ephraim? The company? The men with money and guns? He looked toward the horizon, where the faint plume of train smoke drifted across the sunset. "We ain't meant to beat 'em," he said quietly. "We're meant to stand long enough for truth to speak." Amanda didn't fully understand, but something in his tone made her believe him. Inside, as they lit the lamp, she noticed the weariness in his eyes. She poured him a cup of coffee and touched his arm gently. "Rest now," she said. "You've done enough for one day." He nodded, but before sitting down, he took her hand. "Amanda, when they come, don't be afraid." "I'm done being afraid," she said. He smiled softly. "Good. Then maybe the Lord's already working his miracle." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and iron from the faraway tracks. Shadows stretched across the cabin walls. Inside, 2 candles burned steady against the dark. By early spring, the valley began to stir again. The river swelled with meltwater from the mountains, and the air carried the scent of pine sap and thawed soil. Ephraim rose before dawn each day to mend fences and break the ground for planting. Amanda joined him, her hands raw from the spade, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Work had a way of quieting fear. They sowed seed side by side in the cool mornings. Amanda carried the sack. Ephraim scattered the farce grain with slow, practiced sweeps of his arm. The seeds landed in neat lines, small promises buried beneath the earth. When they paused, the world was still enough to hear the river whisper and the distant call of a meadowlark. At midday, they rested beneath the cottonwoods. Amanda watched Ephraim's hands, strong, calloused, careful. "Funny," she said softly, "how peace feels like work." He smiled without looking up. Work is peace when it's honest. That night, as they ate by lamplight, Amanda noticed his shoulders easing, the furrow between his brows fading a little. It felt like they were remembering how to breathe together again. 2 days later, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Amanda stepped out of the cabin, shading her eyes. A tall rider approached, Jonah Begay, leading a pack mule. He waved when he saw her. "Brought you something, Mrs. Weaver?" Amanda smiled. "You shouldn't have, Jonah." He dismounted, his kind eyes glinting beneath his hat brim. "Eliza said you'd need flour before the week's out." He untied the sack from his mule and set it down gently. Ephraim came out from the shed, brushing sawdust from his coat. "Much obliged, brother." Jonah nodded. "Railroad men been busy. They're talking about surveying through this stretch come summer. Thought you should know." Ephraim's face darkened. "They'll have to cross my fence first." Jonah gave a faint smile. "That's what I told them last time they came near my grazing pasture." Amanda poured coffee into tin cups and set them on the porch rail. The 3 of them sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle the trees. Finally, Jonah said, "You both keep faith. I've seen worse men crumble under less. The company ain't God, no matter how loud they shout." Ephraim nodded slowly. "Amen to that." That evening, Amanda brought a loaf of bread to Jonah's wagon before he left. He took it with a grateful nod. "Eliza'll be glad for this. She says she misses your hymns." Amanda smiled faintly. "Maybe someday she'll hear 'em again, when all this is behind us." Jonah swung into his saddle. "When all this is behind you, there'll be a new beginning for everyone around here. Mark my words." He rode off toward the west, the setting sun painting the horizon red. The next morning, Amanda woke to sunlight spilling across the floorboards. The wheat field shimmered faint green, the first sprouts pushing through. Her heart lifted. She stepped outside barefoot, feeling the damp earth between her toes. Ephraim joined her, his hands on his hips as he studied the field. "Looks like the Lord's keeping his promise." Amanda nodded. "Even after everything, life still grows." He smiled softly. "It always does, if you give it care." They spent the rest of the morning tending to chores, patching the roof, checking the livestock, hauling water from the well. Each small act carried quiet purpose. After supper that night, Amanda took out her old slate and chalk. "Thought I might teach the neighbor children again," she said. "Been too long since they had lessons." Ephraim looked up from sharpening his chisel. "You do that?" "Seems wrong to let ignorance grow where we could plant better things," she replied. He nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit that saves towns." Amanda smiled. "Maybe just hearts." As the lamplight flickered, she opened her Bible and read aloud from the Psalms. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steadier. Ephraim listened, eyes closed, his rough hands folded in quiet prayer. Outside, night settled over the valley. The wind carried the faint sound of frogs by the river and the cry of an owl in the distance. The fields rustled softly with new life. Amanda looked through the window, watching the shadows move over the wheat. For the first time since her humiliation, she didn't feel small. The land itself seemed to be standing with her. "Ephraim," she said quietly, "you reckon we'll be all right?" He looked at her, eyes steady in the lamplight. "I reckon the Lord don't start a thing he won't finish." She smiled, her heart calm. "Then I'll rest easy." The lamp burned low. Outside, under the wide western sky, the tiny wheat shoots glowed silver in the moonlight, faith taking root in the soil of second chances. The sun climbed over Calico Bend, warm and bright after a long spell of spring chill. Amanda stood by the wagon, smoothing her plain dress and adjusting the scarf over her still short hair. Ephraim lifted a small crate into the back. Slates, chalk, a Bible, and a loaf of cornbread wrapped in cloth. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, tying down the reins. Amanda smiled faintly. "If I wait till I feel ready, I'll never do it." He nodded. "You'll do fine. Those young'uns need someone with patience, and I reckon you've got more than most." The road to the schoolhouse wound through fields bright with wildflowers. The wheels creaked, and the smell of new wheat drifted from the valley. As they passed Jonah's small corral, he waved from his porch, his son chasing a stray goat in circles. "Tell those children I'll visit with stories when the work slows," he called. Amanda laughed. "You'll be the reward if they behave?" When the wagon reached the tiny log schoolhouse, a few children were already waiting, barefoot, dusty, and shy. Their mothers stood nearby, whispering as Amanda climbed down. She saw a few glances at her scarf, but no cruel looks this time. "Morning," she said gently. "I'm here to teach letters and numbers, and maybe a hymn or two if you've got the breath for it." The children giggled. One small boy raised his hand. "Miss, my ma says you're the lady what sings in the river when nobody's watching." Amanda flushed, surprised, then smiled. "Then your ma has sharp ears." Inside, sunlight poured through the single window. The benches were rough, the floor swept clean. She set out slates and chalk, then began her lesson. At first, the children whispered and fidgeted, but soon they leaned close as she traced letters on the board. Her voice was calm, her movements sure. "Each word is a tool," she told them. "Use it honest, and it'll build things no hand can." As the morning passed, laughter filled the room. Gentle, genuine. For Amanda, each sound felt like another piece of her shame fading into dust. When the noon bell clanged from the church down the hill, she let the children go. A few mothers came forward to thank her, offering eggs or flour in trade. Amanda accepted, her heart full. Outside, a tall shadow stretched across the path, Ephraim waiting beside the wagon. He smiled when he saw her. "You look lighter." "Maybe I am," she said. "Those children are hungry for learning. I'd near forgotten how much hope lives in a classroom." He took the crate from her hands. "You gave 'em more than lessons today. You gave 'em reason to look up again." They rode home through the soft afternoon light. Birds skimmed the fields. The air smelled of clover. Ephraim reached over and covered her hand with his. "I saw how they looked at you. No laughter this time." Amanda nodded. "Maybe they're learning too." When they reached the cabin, she stepped down and looked toward the wheat field. The green stalks swayed gently in the breeze. "It's growing fast," she said. "Faith usually does when it's tended," Ephraim replied. That evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch with coffee. The first stars blinked to life over the ridge. Amanda hummed a hymn softly under her breath. Ephraim listened for a moment before joining in, his deep voice blending with hers. The harmony filled the quiet like a prayer carried on the wind. When the last note faded, Amanda whispered, "It feels good to belong again." Ephraim's eyes softened. "You never stopped belonging. Folks just took a while to remember." A lantern flickered in the window, casting a warm glow across the porch. Amanda leaned back, the sounds of frogs rising from the river. For the first time since the day of her humiliation, the world around her felt still, safe, and full of promise. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of thanks, not for rescue, but for renewal. The first signs of summer came early that year. Grass on the hills turned gold, and the air shimmered with heat even before noon. From their porch, Amanda and Ephraim could see dust rising from the road, the whole valley stirring with talk of a traveling preacher setting up a revival tent near Calico Bend. Amanda folded her hands in her lap. "Revivals draw crowds," she said quietly. "Crowds still remember what happened." Ephraim looked out toward the road. "Maybe that's why we ought to go. The Lord's work don't. Stop for shame." 2 days later, they rode into town in their wagon. The air smelled of roasted corn and lamp oil. The big white tent stood behind the church, its ropes creaking in the wind. Folks from every ranch and cabin had gathered, women in bonnets, miners with dusty coats, even children chasing each other through the tall grass. Amanda hesitated at the edge of the crowd. Her heart thumped at every familiar face. But no one laughed this time. A few nodded politely. The preacher, Reverend Josiah Tillman, stood at the front of the tent, wiping his brow. His voice rang warm and strong. "This valley's seen bitterness," he said, "but the Lord's mercy can wash even that clean." Amanda slipped her arm through Ephraim's. "He means us," she whispered. Ephraim's eyes softened. "Then let's give him something honest to see." They found seats near the back. The air inside was thick with sweat and dust, but when the hymn began, Amanda's voice rose with the others. At first she sang soft, barely above a whisper, then stronger. People turned, recognizing the woman they'd once mocked. Her voice, clear and trembling with feeling, seemed to pull the sting out of old memories. When the hymn ended, Reverend Tillman raised his hands. "Forgiveness is the only rail that leads home," he said. "Let the proud humble themselves, and let the wronged rise up in peace." Amanda bowed her head. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Ephraim laid a hand gently on hers, his rough thumb brushing her knuckles. "We're doing all right," he whispered. After the service, several townsfolk came forward to greet them. The barber mumbled an apology. One of the miners' wives offered a jar of honey. Amanda's heart fluttered with disbelief, but she accepted each gesture quietly. As the sun dropped, the preacher approached them. "Brother Weaver," he said, "I've heard what you endured. I hope this meeting marks a new beginning for this town." Ephraim nodded. "Every seed starts under dirt, Reverend. Sometimes it takes burying to grow." The preacher smiled. "Well said, my friend." They rode home under a sky lit with stars. The wheels squeaked over the dry earth, and the air smelled of dust and lilac. Amanda leaned against Ephraim's shoulder. "You think it'll last?" she asked softly. "What's that?" "The kindness." He thought for a long moment before answering. "If it's real, it will. If it's not, the Lord'll test it soon enough." When they reached the cabin, the moon hung bright over the valley. The wheat shimmered silver in the night wind. Ephraim helped her down from the wagon. "You sang strong tonight," he said. "Sounded like truth." Amanda smiled faintly. Felt like forgiveness. Inside, she lit the lantern and poured 2 cups of water. They drank in silence, the flame flickering between them. For a brief, blessed moment, the world felt still again, like the storm had finally passed. Neither knew that shadows were already gathering beyond the ridge, men with railroad money in their pockets and vengeance in their eyes. The next evening, the revival tent glowed like a lantern against the darkening sky. Fireflies danced among the cottonwoods, and the smell of kerosene lamps mingled with dust and sweetgrass. Amanda and Ephraim arrived early, helping Reverend Tillman arrange benches for the growing crowd. The preacher smiled kindly at them. "The Lord's work moves quick when hearts are soft," he said. Amanda nodded, though her heart beat with unease. Something in the wind felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. She told herself it was only nerves. Tonight, she would help lead the hymn. By sunset, the tent was full. Women fanned themselves with folded papers. Men whispered and shifted on benches. When the singing began, Amanda's voice carried clear and bright above the others. She sang of mercy and redemption, her hands trembling as she clasped her hymnal. Ephraim watched from the aisle, pride shining in his eyes. Then the tent flap burst open. A man strode in, boots pounding the dirt. His long coat trailed behind him, and a silver badge gleamed under the lamplight. Silas Crane. The murmur of voices died. Amanda's breath caught. Ephraim's hands clenched at his sides. Crane's voice boomed through the hush. "This gathering preaches forgiveness, does it? Then let's see how far forgiveness reaches when the law comes calling." He held up a folded paper. "Got myself a warrant here. For murder." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reverend Tillman stepped forward, startled. "Sir, this is a house of worship." Crane shoved the paper into his chest. "Not tonight it ain't. Tonight it's a court of reckoning." His eyes fixed on Ephraim. "You remember the name Jared Holt? Foreman from the old rail strike?" Ephraim's jaw tightened. "He was killed by his own man." "Funny," Crane sneered. "This paper says otherwise." Amanda rose from her seat, trembling. "That's a lie." Crane turned toward her, a cruel smile curling his lip. "And you must be the lady they sheared. I see your hair's trying to grow back. Shame to waste good steel." He reached forward suddenly and yanked the scarf from her head. Gasps filled the tent as her cropped hair caught the lantern light. A cruel laugh spread through a few of the rougher men in the back. Amanda froze, humiliation flooding through her chest. But this time she didn't look down. She met Crane's eyes, voice steady. "You can shear a woman, but not her faith." Silence followed. Even the cruel ones stopped laughing. Ephraim stepped forward slowly. His voice was calm, but every word cut deep. "You're trespassing on holy ground, Crane. Put that paper away before your soul tears itself clean open." Crane smirked. "Save your preachin'. The law's the law." He gestured to 2 deputies at the tent entrance. Take him. Amanda cried out as the men grabbed Ephraim's arms. He didn't struggle. He only looked at her and said softly, "It's all right. Truth'll stand." Jonah pushed through the crowd, his dark face blazing with anger. "You got no right, Crane. That paper's forged. I know your tricks." Crane drew his pistol in a blur, pointing it square at Jonah's chest. "You hush, Navajo. Don't think the law protects you none either." Reverend Tillman stepped between them, trembling. "Please, there's children here." Crane lowered the gun, smiling coldly. "Then let the children learn early what happens to liars." Ephraim's voice broke the tension. "Let him go, Jonah. The Lord don't need fists to fight falsehood." Jonah's hands shook, but he stepped back. Amanda's heart pounded as the deputies led Ephraim toward the tent flap. Dust swirled at their feet. "Where are you taking him?" she demanded. "To the freight depot," Crane replied. "Town jail's too full for saints and fools." She moved to follow, but Crane blocked her path. "You stay here, miss. Wouldn't want you losing more hair than you already have." For a moment, Amanda thought Ephraim would speak, but he only looked over his shoulder at her, eyes calm and sure. "Keep faith," he said. "Light don't beg the dark for mercy, it just shines." Then they were gone. Amanda stood trembling, her hands clenched tight against her chest. Reverend Tillman approached her, face pale. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. She shook her head. "Don't be. Just pray he's right." As the last hymn faded into silence, Amanda stepped out into the night. The moon hung low, pale as bone. She looked toward the valley where the depot stood and whispered to herself, "You can shear a woman, but not her faith." Then she squared her shoulders and started walking into the dark. The night wind carried a bitter chill as Amanda walked the narrow trail toward Calico Bend. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and her boots sank into the damp earth with every step. Each mile felt longer than the last. By the time she reached the edge of town, dawn had begun to pale the eastern sky. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the sound of a telegraph clicking echoed faintly through the still air. The old freight depot stood near the rail yard, a sagging wooden building that smelled of iron and mold. Amanda's heart thudded as she approached. Through the slats of a boarded window, she saw Ephraim sitting on a crate inside, wrists chained but his back straight. His coat hung over his shoulders, and a soft beam of morning light touched his face. She called his name quietly. "Ephraim." He looked up, his eyes calm even in the dimness. "You shouldn't be here." "I couldn't stay away." The door creaked open behind her, and Sheriff Dobbs stepped out of the shadows, a lantern in hand. His gray hair was damp with sweat. "He ain't in no danger, ma'am. We're holding him till Judge Collins rides in." Amanda turned to him. "You know these charges are false." Dobbs sighed. "I know Crane's paper smells of lies, but law says I gotta wait for the judge." "Law ain't worth the ink if it serves men like Crane," she said, her voice trembling. The sheriff rubbed the back of his neck. "You sound like your husband, and truth be told, that scares me a little." He nodded toward the building. "You can see him a minute, then you'd best go." Amanda stepped inside. The depot was cold and dark, except for the lantern light. Ephraim smiled faintly as she knelt beside him. "You look tired," he said. "So do you." He shrugged, chains clinking softly. "Could be worse. Could be the gallows." "Don't say that." He studied her face, voice gentle. "You came all this way. Why?" "Because I won't let lies win," she whispered. "Jonah says he's got proof. The clerk who forged the deed can be found. We'll bring it before the judge." Ephraim's eyes glimmered. "Then that's where our hope lies." Amanda took his hand, her thumb brushing over his rough skin. "They can chain you, Ephraim, but they can't bind what you stand for." Before he could reply, the depot door burst open. Jonah entered, breathless from his ride. His coat was dusted with travel, and a bandage wrapped his arm. "I found him," he said quickly. "The clerk. He's in Pueblo, ready to sign an affidavit. But we need time." Dobbs frowned. "You expect me to hold off Crane with nothing but promises?" Jonah met his eyes. "Hold off the devil long enough, Sheriff, and the Lord'll send light through the cracks." The sheriff hesitated, then spat into the dirt. "You got till the judge gets here. 2, maybe 3 days. After that, my hands are tied." Amanda's shoulders straightened. "We'll ride tonight," Jonah nodded. "I'll get the horses ready. We'll bring back the truth." Ephraim looked up at her, worry flickering in his eyes. "It's a long road, Amanda. You sure you can make it?" She smiled faintly. "I walked longer roads to find forgiveness." The sheriff unlocked the door to let her out. As she stepped into the sunlight, she turned back once more. "Hold on, Ephraim. We'll bring justice home." He nodded, his voice soft. "I know you will. You always keep your word." Outside, the wind rose, carrying the distant whistle of a train. Jonah waited by the hitching post, 2 horses saddled and ready. Amanda mounted, her heart heavy but resolute. The sheriff called after them. "You got 48 hours, Mrs. Weaver. After that, the law takes its course." Amanda didn't look back. "Then I reckon we'll make the law tell the truth." As the horses galloped toward the open plains, the rising sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold light across the valley. Behind them, the depot stood quiet. But within its walls, Ephraim bowed his head and whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the woman riding into the dawn to save him. The road to Pueblo stretched long beneath a pale dawn. Amanda gripped the reins tight, her hands raw from the rains and wind. Jonah rode beside her, his hat pulled low, his face shadowed with exhaustion. They'd been riding since midnight, stopping only once to water the horses. Each mile brought them closer to hope and danger. Dust rose behind their hooves, curling like smoke in the rising sun. Amanda's dress was spattered with mud, her hair tangled, but her eyes were fierce. "How far now?" she asked. Jonah pointed toward the hazy line of cottonwoods ahead. "Another hour. The clerk boards at the mission house near the old rail office." Amanda nodded, her jaw set. "Then we ride till we find him." By mid-morning, the town came into view, a scatter of wooden buildings, a church spire, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Pueblo was busy with wagons and traders. Amanda and Jonah dismounted outside the mission house, tying the horses beneath a shade tree. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and soap. A gray-haired nun opened the door. "Travelers?" she asked kindly. Jonah tipped his hat. "We seek a man, Samuel Griggs. He worked for the rail company last year." The nun nodded slowly. "He's here. Keeps the books for the mission now. Been sickly of late." She led them down a narrow hall to a small room where a thin man lay beneath a quilt, coughing softly. His eyes fluttered open as they entered. Amanda stepped forward. "Mr. Griggs, I'm Amanda Weaver. This is Jonah Begay. You signed papers for the Colorado Western Rail Company 2 years ago, under Silas Crane." The man's eyes clouded. "I don't—" Jonah knelt beside the bed, his tone gentle. "You remember the Weaver's deed, don't you? The one they tried to copy over." Griggs swallowed hard. "Crane made me sign false transfers, said no one would check." Amanda's heart leapt. "Then you'll swear it?" He nodded weakly. "If I can still hold a pen." Jonah helped him sit up, sliding paper and ink toward him. The pen scratched shakily across the page. Griggs signed his name beneath a short statement. The weaver's title was forged under duress. Original ownership stands. When it was done, Amanda folded the page carefully, her hands trembling. "You've done a righteous thing, sir." Griggs gave a faint smile. "Just late is all. Tell the truth before it's too heavy to carry." They thanked him, left a coin by his bedside, and stepped out into the sunlight. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain from the west. Jonah exhaled. "That's it. That paper's our proof." Amanda pressed the document to her chest. "Then we ride home." They mounted quickly, turning the horses north. Clouds gathered fast over the plains, dark and heavy. Thunder rumbled. The first drops struck their faces like icy needles. Jonah shouted over the wind, "We'll stop at the ridge when the storm breaks." But Amanda shook her head. "No, Ephraim's waiting. Every minute counts." Lightning cracked across the sky, bright as fire. The horses spooked but kept their pace. They rode through sheets of rain, soaked to the bone, the paper sealed inside Amanda's shawl. Her fingers went numb around the reins, but she didn't slow. By late evening, the clouds began to break. They camped near the river, smoke from their small fire rising into the damp air. Amanda spread the affidavit near the flames, careful not to scorch it. The ink glistened dark and sure. Jonah handed her a biscuit and smiled. "You've got more grit than most men I know." Amanda met his gaze. "I ain't got grit, Jonah, just reason." He nodded. "That's the same thing when the reason's love." She looked toward the horizon where Calico Bend lay, somewhere beyond the dark hills. "Tomorrow, Ephraim will see the truth in these pages. And Silas Crane, he'll see the light he's been running from." Jonah added wood to the fire. "We ride at dawn." Amanda wrapped the proof in a strip of oilcloth, holding it close like a newborn child. Above them, the stars blinked through the thinning clouds, quiet witnesses to the courage of two souls racing against the storm. The morning broke clear and sharp after the long storm. Mist rose off the river like steam, and the grass shimmered wet beneath the sun. Amanda packed the affidavit carefully inside her shawl, binding it tight beneath her coat. Jonah saddled the horses, both animals restless after the night's rain. They rode in silence for the first few miles, hooves squelching in the mud. The air smelled of damp sage and wet pine. Every step forward brought them closer to Calico Bend, and to whatever waited there. By midday, they stopped on a high ridge overlooking the valley. From that height, the railroad line glinted faintly in the distance, stretching like a scar across the land. Amanda stared at it, her heart tightening. "So much trouble for one strip of iron," she murmured. Jonah nodded. Men trade their souls for less. They rode again, the wind at their backs. By dusk, Calico Bend's lights flickered in the distance. Smoke curled from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere down the slope. At the edge of town, Jonah turned to her. "You ready?" Amanda's hands tightened on the reins. Ready as a body can be when truth's the only weapon. They passed the church, quiet in the fading light, and crossed the bridge toward home. Amanda's eyes stung as she saw the outline of their cabin against the gold sky. The wheat fields rippled gently in the wind. Green, strong, alive. Jonah dismounted first. "I'll take this to the judge in the morning. You rest." Amanda nodded. "Thank you, Jonah. You've stood by us like kin." He smiled faintly. "Faith makes better kin than blood." When he rode off, the valley fell silent again. Amanda stood alone by the porch, the affidavit warm against her chest. Firelight flickered through the cabin window, Ephraim's signal. She whispered a prayer of thanks and stepped inside. Ephraim rose from his chair, eyes weary but full of light. "You found it?" She held up the paper. "The truth, Ephraim. Signed and sealed." He took her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Then the Lord's already halfway to setting us free." Outside, night fell soft and steady, carrying the promise of justice on the wind. Morning light poured through the courthouse windows, catching dust motes that hung like floating gold. The room was crowded. Miners, ranchers, and townsfolk pressed close, whispering as Amanda entered with Jonah beside her. Ephraim stood near the front, his wrists free now, his head bowed in prayer. Judge Collins struck the gavel. "Bring forth your proof." Amanda stepped forward, hands steady though her knees trembled. She unfolded the affidavit and held it up. "This was signed by Samuel Griggs, former clerk of the railroad. He swears our deed was forged by Silas Crane and his men." The judge adjusted his spectacles, reading silently. Crane's face paled. "Lies," he snapped. "She's just a farmer's wife." Jonah rose. "And I'm a witness to Griggs's confession. The truth don't care who speaks it." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge set the paper down and looked at Crane. "The seal's real. The hand's his." Crane's bravado faltered. He reached for his coat, but Sheriff Dobbs stepped between them. "I think the law's looking your way now, Crane." The judge banged the gavel once more. "Charges dismissed. The land stands rightful to the Weavers." Amanda's eyes filled with tears as Ephraim took her hand. The crowd fell silent, humbled. She turned to face them all, her voice clear. "You can shear a woman, but you can't shear truth." Ephraim smiled softly. "Nor faith." Outside, the church bell rang, bright and free, echoing across the valley. Days passed, bright and full of life. The wind over the valley carried laughter again. Calico Bend had begun to change. Men who once turned away now tipped their hats when Amanda walked by. The Weaver's farm, once lonely and half-forsaken, buzzed with neighbors helping mend fences and rebuild the barn roof. Ephraim worked from dawn till dusk, his hammer ringing through the fields. Amanda led songs as the workers labored, old hymns that spoke of mercy, harvest, and new beginnings. Jonah and Eliza brought timber from their own pasture, their children running through the grass with joy. Reverend Tillman came often, sleeves rolled up, helping lift beams with a humble grin. "Preachin' comes easy," he said, "but this is gospel in motion." Amanda smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "The Lord's word always builds something if you let it." When the last wall was raised, Ephraim carved a small cross into the main beam and said, "This house stands not by strength, but by grace." That evening, the valley glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Neighbors shared stew and bread by lamplight, laughter echoing across the hills. Amanda stood beside Ephraim on the porch, watching the wheat sway like ocean waves. "We're whole again," she whispered. He nodded, his voice low. "Whole and forgiven." The sound of crickets filled the air, and somewhere in the dark, the church bell chimed softly, a promise that peace had come to stay. The first snow of winter fell soft and silent, blanketing the valley like grace descending from heaven. Each flake glittered in the pale light of dawn. The wheat fields slept beneath their white cover, and smoke curled from the Weaver chimney, steady and warm. Inside, Amanda stirred stew over the fire, while Ephraim sanded the last plank of pine for the church pews. The scent of sawdust and stew mingled, a humble perfume of peace hard-won. Jonah and Eliza had been coming by each morning, their children bringing laughter that filled the cabin. Now, as the snow deepened, the whole town joined in raising the new meeting house, a place built not from guilt but from gratitude. Ephraim worked side by side with miners who once mocked him. each man quiet under the weight of forgiveness. By noon, Reverend Tillman arrived, his breath steaming in the cold. "Never seen a church rise faster," he said, smiling. "Seems the Lord's hands are many here." Ephraim nodded. "Ain't our doing alone, Reverend. Mercy builds faster than any hammer." When the steeple was lifted, the men stood back, wiping their brows. Amanda brought warm bread and coffee for everyone. She moved among them with a gentle confidence that once had seemed lost forever. Each word she spoke, each small kindness, stitched the town back together. As twilight came, lanterns flickered in the windows of the new church. Families gathered inside, Navajo and settler, farmer and blacksmith, all shoulder to shoulder. Amanda took her place at the front, leading a hymn. Her voice rose, rich and clear, no longer trembling. Ephraim's deeper tone joined hers, filling the rafters with sound. Jonah's children clapped along softly, smiling up at their parents. When the last note faded, Reverend Tillman stepped forward. "This town once chose shame over mercy," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But look at what mercy built." Ephraim turned to Amanda, his eyes reflecting the golden lamplight. "You feared God once," she said gently, echoing their first talk by the hearth. "Thought he only judged." He smiled, brushing a stray curl from her brow. "Now I know he restores." The congregation bowed their heads as Ephraim prayed. A simple prayer of thanks for love returned, land redeemed, and peace made whole. Outside, snow drifted down in slow, forgiving silence. When the service ended, Amanda and Ephraim walked home beneath the stars. Their lantern swung between them, casting a soft circle of light on the white ground. Behind them, the new steeple shone faint against the moon, a beacon of hope. At the cabin door, Ephraim paused, looking back over the valley. "Strange," he murmured, "how what's broken can lead others home." Amanda slipped her hand into his. "That's what shepherds do." And as the lantern burned steady in their window, the world seemed new again, washed clean by mercy, warmed by love everlasting. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.